Today I also want to take you guys on a journey looking into the new covenants as we begin and have a communion service today. Debbie, it was the year 2000. Debbie went to the doctor's office, pretty standard routine. However, this time she got some unfortunate news. She shows up and the doctor did some studies, did some tests, and she received a diagnosis that she has essential thrombocytosis. And when you have a diagnosis like that, I imagine your mind just gets flooded with different thoughts. You know, this isn't something that she's probably heard of before, so that's good news, right? It's not cancer or anything like that, but I imagine the name alone is rather scary. She received this diagnosis, a blood disorder, and this blood disorder makes it so that her body produces an excessive amount of platelets, and this leads to increased chances of receiving blood clots, which leads to strokes, and so it can be a very deadly disease and diagnosis to receive. She received this year in the year 2000, and she kind of managed and dealt with this disease for a few years, actually 20 years. She lived with this disease, taking her medicine, doing everything she possibly could to just kind of manage and get by with this diagnosis that she had. Until the year 2020, when a giant kind of storm all came together, a perfect storm for her. She goes to the doctor one more time, beginning of February, and her essential thrombocytosis turned into AML, acute myeloid leukemia. Devastated, scared. This is the most fatal type of leukemia you can receive, and she received this diagnosis in February. She begins chemo the next week. After just one round of chemotherapy, COVID happens, and everything is put into lockdown. She's in the hospital, afraid, scared of this diagnosis she's just received. And she's alone now. She can't see her friends. She can't see her husband, her kids, her grandkids. She's alone, scared, wondering what's going to happen, how much longer she has, what's going to happen next. And she begins to go through this chemo, and she's just kind of getting worse and worse, weaker and weaker. The doctors notice this as well, and so they go to her and they say, Debbie, you need a transplant. You need a blood stem cell transplant in order to survive. And so Debbie is like, okay. She signs up for a list to be on a donor list and to find a match, and she's beginning to just go down and down with hope not very near, wondering what's going to happen. A couple of days go by, months go by, time goes by, and Debbie eventually gets the news from the doctors that they had found a match for her. She's immediately filled with all these questions. Who is this person? What's his background? Like, why is he wanting to become a donor? Are we really a match? Who is this person? She learns the man's name is Frank. And Frank, he had a father that passed away from a similar illness a while ago. And so he knows the pain and suffering that this illness can cause people. And so he signed up to be on a donor list, and he found out he was a match. And so through COVID, they were able to, get his blood, send it over to her, and they were able to give this blood transplant for her. And luckily, there was no signs of rejection or anything like this, which is very reasonable and possible with this thing, but she was able to fully become in remission of leukemia. She no longer needed to go to chemo, and she was able to leave the hospital pretty soon after. And she says when she got out, she immediately started to do everything that she wanted to do, right? She went to the lake with her family, she went to the beach, she did all kinds of traveling, because she was like, I was alone in that hospital. I was basically dead in that hospital for so long. I'm going to do everything I can. She got a second chance at life. She took her kids and her grandkids on a vacation overseas, just wanting to spend as much time with them as she possibly could. She had a second chance on life because of Frank, because he donated some of his blood and wanted to give part of himself to someone he didn't know. And today I want to talk about the second chance that Debbie received. We see tons of times where second chances are given throughout the Bible. We're talking about the new covenant today. And as you know, there's several covenants that happen in the Bible. We have it from the very beginning with Adam and Eve. Things are not looking good. They've been kicked out of the garden. The whole world is turning more and more evil, wondering what's going to happen. And along comes Noah. And God makes a covenant with Noah, giving humans a second chance. However, the story repeats itself. Things are no longer looking good soon after this covenant. Humans have messed up, and they're in need of a second chance. Along comes Abraham, and God makes this covenant with Abraham, and he gives them a second chance again. The story repeats itself once again. Along comes Moses, and Moses makes a covenant with God on the Sinai, and he makes a covenant with all of his people. The people complain, and they reject God, and the story repeats itself. And it goes on and on. We see King David receive a covenant. But again and again, humans fail this covenant and are in need of a second chance. And where we come to the new covenant, talked about in Jeremiah 31 to 34. And in this covenant, there are 4 promises. So as I read through it, I want to see if you guys can find these 4 promises within the new covenant. So we have in Jeremiah 31 to 34. The days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the people of Israel, with all the people of Judah. It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them out of by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant, though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. This is the covenant I will make with the people of Israel after that time, declares the Lord. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. I will be their God, and they will be my people. No longer will they teach their neighbor or say to one another, know the Lord, because they will all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their wickedness, and I will remember their sins no more. It is a beautiful covenant. Did you guys catch the 4 promises? All right, what was the first one we had? Teach. All right, yeah. So we have a promise of sanctification for this first promise. I will put my law in their minds and write it on their hearts. All right, what was the second promise that was given in this? Maybe you guys didn't catch it. We have a promise of reconciliation. I will be their God, and they will be my people. What about the third promise? The third promise is a promise of a mission. No longer will they teach their neighbor, for they will all know me, from the least to the greatest. Everyone on this world will know me. And the fourth promise is probably one of my favorites, of justification. I will forgive, and I will remember their sins no more. With these covenant and these 4 promises that we see, as we begin to study and look into them, though, we see that they're actually not new promises. These promises have been made before in previous covenants, and so you're like, okay, if all of these promises are not new, what makes this a new covenant? For example, we can see this first promise, the promise of I will put my law in their hearts and write it on their hearts. We can see this in Deuteronomy 30, verse 6. The Lord your God will circumcise your hearts and the hearts of your descendants, so that you may love him with all your heart and with all your soul and live. As well as verse 14. No, the word is very near to you. It is in your mouth and it is in your heart, so you may obey it. So we see a very similar promise of, I will put my law in their minds and in their hearts. As well as for the second promise, the promise of reconciliation. I will be their people and they will be, or I will be their God and they will be my people. We can see this in other covenants as well. Leviticus 26:12. I will walk among you and be your God, and you will be my people. The third promise, the promise of mission, this can be seen from the beginning, right? Right when Abraham is called, he says, I will bless you so that you may go and bless all the nations around you. We constantly see the Israelites being called to this mission of sharing God to those around them, to sharing the blessing so that all may know him. We can see this illustrated in Ezekiel 36:23. I will show the holiness of my great name, which has been profaned among the nations. The name you have profaned among them. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord, declares the sovereign Lord, when I have proved holy through you before their eyes. Right? Then the nations will know. Right? We see this third promise of mission fulfilled here. We see the fourth promise of justification. We see this as well in previous covenants. We see it in Exodus 34:6-7, when God is pronouncing his character, who his name is. And he says, he passed in front of Moses, proclaiming, the Lord, the God, the compassionate and gracious God, slow to anger, abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands, and forgiving wickedness and rebellion of sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. He punishes the children and their children for the sins of the parents to the third and fourth generation. But we see he's a forgiving God, and he will remember their sins no more. So as we look at these promises, we realize they've been around before. They're not new to this covenant. They're not unique just in this passage. So what makes this a new covenant? What's different about it if all the promises are the same as all the other ones? What makes this new? And we see this actually in the introduction to the new covenant. And Jeremiah 31:32. It says, "It will not be like the covenant I made with their ancestors when I took them by the hand to lead them out of Egypt, because they broke my covenant. Though I was a husband to them, declares the Lord. Though I was a husband, though I was committed and in this relationship with them, I was a part and connected in this covenantal relationship. They broke it. They ran away. They turned to other gods. They left this covenant. This new covenant is going to be different because they're not going to break my covenant. I will be their husband, and they will be my bride. They will not break this covenant." That's what makes this new covenant new. We have a different response to this new covenant, which is amazing to think about, being in a relationship with God where it's no longer broken, no longer scarred. But as I think about it, it's a little bit scary. If we're living in a new covenant time, I don't know if I can be good enough to be a part of this covenant, right? I don't know if I can go without breaking this covenant. I can read the Old Testament and I can kind of laugh at the Israelites, being like, okay, why are you complaining now? Why are you doing this? I can poke fun at them for leaving this covenant with God when he has clearly showed time and time again how good he is to them, and be like, oh, I'm better than them. But when I think about it, I have the same diagnosis as them. I am full of sin. I am just as broken as they are. We are still humans diagnosed with a sin problem, diagnosed with a fatal sin problem. How are we going to live in this new covenant with God where, though he is our husband, we will not leave him? How are we to do this? Right? It's a scary thought. And the answer is we can't. If you think about it, no matter how hard you try, you cannot live up to this. You cannot be perfect. You cannot try your hardest to do everything possible and be able to live in this new covenant by yourself. And that's exactly where this new covenant is pointing. You see, the term new covenant only actually appears 8 times in the entire Bible. Here's the first one in Jeremiah 31:32. And the second one, we actually continue to see leading and building up to this answer of how are we supposed to live in this new covenant. See, all the covenants build on each other. We see them continually pointing to someone who's going to be able to fulfill these covenants and live and be a covenant partner with God. And we see the second time the new covenant appears is with Jesus. Jesus says in Luke 22:20, during the Last Supper, he's celebrating the Passover. He's just celebrating and remembering the Israelites slaying the lamb, painting their doorstep red to provide salvation for them. And in the same way, God is at the same time saying, here, take this cup. This cup is the new covenant in my blood, which is poured out for you. You see, what else is different about this new covenant? It's not just a different response, but we have a different focus on this new covenant. This new covenant is centered around Jesus. Jesus is the mediator of this new covenant. Jesus inaugurated this new covenant with his blood. He says, take this cup. This is the new covenant. Take this cup. Even though I know everyone in this room, I know that you are all about to betray me. I know the pain I'm about to go through. I know this all. But take this cup and enter into a new relationship with me. Take this cup so that me and you will be in eternity forever. Take this cup so that I may be connected to you. Take this cup. It is the new covenant in my blood. I have sacrificed everything so that you may receive this blood transplant, so that you may be cured of your sin diagnosis. This is how we live in the new covenant, through Christ's blood. We see in Romans 6:6, for we know that our old self was crucified with him, dead to self, and the body ruled by sin might be done away with, that we should no longer be slaves to sin. We receive a blood transfusion from God, a blood transplant, and we are no longer slaves to sin. We are cured of our sin problem, our sin diagnosis. We may live and have a second chance at life because God says, take this cup. I want to be in a new relationship with you. And this is exactly why Paul can continue on in 2 Corinthians 3:4-6. Such confidence we have through Christ before God. Not that we are competent in ourselves to claim anything for ourselves, but our competence comes from God. So Paul's pointing out, he's saying you can't live a new covenant lifestyle, right? Like if you tried your hardest with your own strength, you're going to fail. But he says we are competent through God. We are competent because of God. We are competent only because of God's competence. And through this, he made us competent as ministers of a new covenant. You see, in this new covenant, we are not trying our hardest. We are not managing our disease, just trying our very, very best to be able to just get by with life. We are able to thrive and be a minister of the new covenant, to share this love, to share this passion to all of those around us. Debbie, as she received this news that she had a blood transplant donor, she was filled with questions. Who is this person? You know, after she receives this transplant, she's healed. Because it was during COVID, she wasn't able to meet Frank. She hadn't had a chance to thank him, to do any of this. And in this interview, she says, I can't wait till the day I see him so I can run, hug him, so I can express my deepest gratitude, so I can do everything I can to express my thanks to this man. Her husband and her kids are saying, I cannot believe what Frank has done. He has given our mother, our wife, a second chance at life, and I cannot repay him in any way. The same is true for God. When we realize our brokenness, when we receive that diagnosis of, you can't do this on your own, you are full of sin and you need a blood transplant in order to live, that's an inherent response to saying, I just want to thank you, right? Debbie's response is not something she has to try to do. That's deep within her of like, I naturally just want to thank this person for giving me a second chance on life. And the same is true for us. To have this response of gratitude, of thanking God, because we have recognized our brokenness, recognized our diagnosis, but we have also seen that we have a match, that we have a blood donor who is saying, despite what I know about you, I still want to be in a relationship with you. I still want to love you. You see, Frank, he became a blood donor because he knew what it was like to suffer, what it was like to watch someone he loved suffer in pain, to die. He knew what that loss was like. And in spite of it being a stranger that he didn't know or care about, he says, I still want to prevent them from going through that pain. And God is the same way. He's seen what sin can do in the human life. He's seen time and time again, from generation to generation, the pain that sin has on humans, the pain and the loss that endures through it. And he says, despite knowing that they're still going to sin, that they're broken people, I want to give them everything I have. I want to sacrifice my life for them. I want to give them all so that they may live, so that they may not have to go through that death, through that pain, through that loss. I will pour my blood on them and give them a life-saving blood transplant. Jesus says, I want to enter into eternity with this person. Hebrews 9:15, for this reason, Christ is the mediator of a new covenant, that those who are called may receive the promised eternal inheritance, now that he has died as a ransom to set them free. Christ died so that we may have a chance to be free. Christ died and sacrificed himself as the lamb offering to wash over us, to give us this blood transplant so that we may live, so that we may enter into a new relationship with him, so that we may see him in heaven for eternity. And today we have the special opportunity to re-enter into this relationship as well. As Christ did this during the Last Supper, he says, "Take, this is my new covenant in my blood." He extended this favor and he says, "I want to enter into a new covenant relationship with you. I want to be connected with you." And today we have an opportunity to remake that decision for us, for this is the new covenant in our communion service. We have a chance to say, "God, I cannot do this on my own. God, I am broken. I am full of sin, and I need you in my life. But God, I need you to do it for me. God, I need your blood. I need your life-saving transplant. I need your Holy Spirit to be poured out onto me so that this may be possible." And we get a chance to do that today. And as I think about covenant relationships, one of the most prevalent that we have today is marriage. And one of the things I've noticed entering into a new marriage, or not the marriage I have, for the first 2 years, I've noticed as time has gone by, I've noticed more and more similarities between me and my wife. We have similar sayings that just kind of naturally happen. She'll start saying something and eventually I'll pick it up on accident. I'll be at work and say something, I'm like, "Wait, that's what Jasmine says normally." Like, I'm picking up on these things. And I've noticed this a lot through life. When you have friends and you're getting close together for the first time, you just kind of morph into the same language. I remember when I was a kid, me and my friend, we wanted a term to be like cool or something like that. So we came up with a term and we started using it, and all of our friends picked it up, and it was like, it spread like wildfire. And you notice as you get close to someone, you kind of just turn into them and you become like kind of one. You share so many similarities. And as we enter into this covenant relationship with God, we become more and more like him. We just get closer and closer to him. And that naturally means we get further and further away from our old self. And so today, as we head into foot washing, for me, I don't really like feet that whole lot. It's a weird act for me to do. But I says, "God, you have asked me to do this. God, you have told me to humble myself, to put others before me. And though it is uncomfortable, Lord, I want to thank you for all that you have done. And I want to become more and more like you. And as I spend time with you, it becomes a little bit less and less awkward and more, how can I serve you? How can I help you?" And so today, as we enter into this new covenant, we're going to be going into different rooms to go into foot washing. And so you have the opportunity to humble yourself, to die to your old self. And though it may be awkward at times, I encourage you to partake in this, for God has said, "Do this in remembrance of me." And so we're going to dismiss for the foot washing at this time. We're going to have the couples and family, they'll be in the gym. They'll have the women in the school library just down the hall, and then the men will be in the second classroom just right over here. And so if you decide you do not want to, that's okay. You can stay in here. There'll be some music playing, and we'll reconvene in a little while to have the rest of our communion service. So let's pray as we dismiss. Dear Heavenly Father, Lord, I thank you for all that you have done for us. I thank you that you have offered us a chance to become part of you, that we may enter into this new relationship with you, that we may rededicate our lives to you. That, Lord, even though we are broken, even though we are full of sin, that you have offered us a cure, that you have offered us a way to be connected to you, to choose freedom, to choose you, and that we may no longer be slaves to sin. And I thank you for all that you have done. In your name we pray.